Good morning, everybody. We are right at 9 o'clock, so we'll start in about give about another 2 or 3 minutes. So just giving you all a heads up once we get give a couple minutes to join us, then we'll begin.
Good morning. Hi, Rebecca.
Good morning. How are you?
I am fine. I'm sorry about the noise. I had people blowing things around my yard. I was like, you've got to go. You've got to go. So I apologize for a
No
moment.
problem. We are live, so everybody can see us. Just giving you a heads up. I don't hear any background noise, so you sound good.
Great.
So I figure we might give people another minute or two to kind of join, since I know it's right at 9 and we're not necessarily the most punctual group in the world.
That's okay. Business is business, I'm gonna shade my background here.
No, I like your background. I'm going to plug my computer in while I remember.
Absolutely. Let me just fix that a little bit so you don't see our folks in the back doing our maintenance to our grounds. They're such great folks. How are things going?
Happy belated birthday, by the way.
I know I'm 25 every year. 25.
Did you do anything fun to celebrate your birthday?
Earlier in the year, like in the earlier time frame, I went to Paris.
Oh, nice. This was a big birthday, right?
It was a big milestone. I mean, turning 30 years old, that's a milestone. Now, yes, I celebrated my 50th. I'm glad to be alive and blessed and well, So earlier in the year, we went to Paris and celebrated. We ate at the most fabulous places, drank the most fabulous wine, and I can't wait to return.
Nice. Have you been there before?
No, but I fell in love with the Jewish community there. They have this big community there. We ate falafel, we ate pastries, we drank, and it was just quaint and very, the vibe of Paris you would expect. They had the most beautiful colors on their buildings. They have historical marks. Inside the city was very busy. I don't know. Have you ever been?
I have. Yeah, I've been a couple of times. Last time I went, Emily was like 1. So it's been 8 years since I was
So
there.
I think it's time for another one. We should all plan a girls' trip.
I like that idea.
And then
My kids are dying to go. They've never been, and it's high on their list to go.
It is kid friendly. It is sort of kid friendly. You see a lot of families and things, taking these tours, seeing the Louvre, seeing
I think my kids would just eat their way through Paris.
That's what you should do. I mean, but you walk it off. I think I lost weight in Paris, 25,000 steps a day, if not more.
Yeah, we were in Israel for spring break. And I actually lost weight on the trip because we were like rappelling and mountain climbing and climbing through caves every day. Well, I see we're at 9:05, so I was going to get started. But before we get started, maybe you and I'm going to take a screenshot and we can smile for our picture so we're not catching you off guard. All right, you ready? 1, 2, 3. All right, let me see how this looks. Let me do one more time. You ready? All right, 1, 2, 3. I think we look good.
I hope so.
All right, so we'll go ahead and get started. I'm going to pull up my questions here, and we'll welcome people. I know we'll have more people joining because we had a lot of people RSVP'd. So my hunch is people are just kind of running late on a Friday morning here. Give me 1 second to get my stuff.
They need their cafe. or cafecito. They need all of this.
I know, right? Can you believe I don't drink coffee.
Oh my God. I don't know how you do it.
I'm married to a coffee drinker, but I actually don't.
That's how you get it. It's osmosis. It's sort of just here's the energy. My superpower.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for everybody joining us this morning. My name is Rebecca Geller, and I am on the board for the Democratic Business Council of Northern Virginia. Just a couple of housekeeping things. Thank you to everyone who came to our event last Friday. We hosted Senator Tim Kaine, and it was a big event and really, really exciting. Today we're starting our candidate speaker series. So today we'll talk about Hala Ayala, who I'll introduce in a moment. But just to give you a sense about events that are upcoming, next Friday, we have the other candidate in the Senate race, Jennifer Carroll Foy, will be speaking with us a week from today. So for those who would like to make sure they see both of the Democrats running in the Senate race, please join us again next Friday. I'll be asking the questions today, so we ask everybody to keep themselves on mute. However, you can use the Q&A function to be able to ask questions. And Hala, you don't have to worry about monitoring the Q&A. I will try to sprinkle in some of those Q&A questions into our conversation. So if you all do have questions, please put them into the Q&A, and I will try to integrate in as many as we can. And if I see a lot more people joining us, I'll mention that again as well. So I'm going to give a brief introduction about Hala, but I'm actually going to talk about her more through our conversation. The goal is today is not necessarily hard-hitting policy questions. It's to get to know you as a person. I've had the opportunity to get to know Hala for several years and have become friends with Hala. And I think that one of the most interesting things about your race is your story about who you are. You have such an interesting and diverse and powerful background, and hearing kind of what drives you really comes from who you are. And so my goal for today is for people in Nova DemBiz to get to know you, to get to know who you are. So, one of the things that we'd like to talk about today is kind of what drives you. What made you first start thinking that, hey, politics is something I'm kind of interested in? Just before I say that, to give you all a sense of kind of Hala's background, Hala served in the House of Delegates for 4 years. She was the House whip appointed by Majority Leader Charnel Herring. And then she was the Democratic nominee for Lieutenant Governor in 2019, and is now running for state Senate in a new Senate seat that encompasses Prince William County and parts of Fairfax County. And it is a mostly Democratic seat. So we kind of presume whoever wins the Democratic nomination will win the Senate seat because it is a mostly Democratic seat. So Hala, tell us, what made you decide politics is something you were interested in?
I technically was, and I wasn't. I liked sitting out. I'm an Afro-Latina, Lebanese, Irish woman. If that doesn't tell you there's passion as soon as I wake up in the morning, conflict and conversation, that diverse, I like to call it allspice that I bring to the table. I'm passionate about a lot of things. My son has disabilities and started in the school as PTO president, as PTO, being on advisory boards, just working towards, equitability in the school system. So I started to do some advocacy, knocking doors, then for candidates up and down the ballot, from top federal offices down to the very local levels. And I was happy doing that. But I think with those lived experiences, coupled with President Trump getting elected, my stepfather is in the military. He served for almost 30 years. And we were taught values about no matter where you sit on the political spectrum or where you disagree or agree on a conversation or a particular issue or topic, respect for the work that you do and the office and the position that you hold, especially the presidency, should always be accompanied by those values. So When that happened, I quit my federal job of 17 plus years with the US Coast Guard. I've been around the military all my life, either through my dad or through family or through my career. And just threw my hat in the ring. I think it was not well thought out because when I was elected, I won with just $68 in my bank account.
So I want to talk a little bit about kind of your backstory. You know, I did some research on you. Even though I know you, I was like, I want to learn more about kind of about your background. So I read in a story that said that you have referred to the documentary Misrepresentation as an inspiration for you to become involved in politics. What was that documentary about, and how did that impact you?
Well, during my time knocking doors and getting involved in volunteerism, I ran across National Organization for Women. What was really enlightening about that documentary that you mentioned was that I didn't have the words to really articulate how I was feeling in my own career. You know, I was one of very few women in the workforce. I saw others around me excel. And what made me different than them other than gender? And so when you watch Misrepresentation, they talk about gender, not just about the issues that impact, women and families, but how they serve, countries have empowered women presidents. And we are the only superpowered nation that has not elected a woman president. And that was stark to me when you talk about pay inequity, when you talk about how much we earn compared to male counterparts, how many CEOs are in the world of business, in the upper echelons of business, the diversity. So that just really added to my already passionate persona and said, I need to go and do more. There's more to be done. We need to level the playing field and start everyone out in an equitable way and make opportunity and be able to make that opportunity available to everyone. And what you do with it is up to you, of course, but just leveling the playing field. And I know I struggled in my personal life. I made $5.25 an hour. I had a child, almost lost. I almost died, not having access to insurance, not having access to, education or being able to afford it. It was something that I wanted to do. I wanted to have the college experience. I wanted to give my kids everything. But sometimes if you start on, first base and everyone else is on third base, that's a challenge, and I wanted to work with everyone to figure out how we can do this in a pragmatic, sensible way, but make it an equitable opportunity.
You touched about your ethnic background, and you said, I know your father was an immigrant from El Salvador and also has North African roots, and that your mom was Irish and Lebanese. It's such an interesting heritage. How does your heritage inform your politics?
I think it's just the strength that we bring to this country, the work that we do collaboratively. I look at it as a tapestry of hope and opportunity, because without my parents, I would not be here. So I tell my kids, we're our walking business card, this body that we have, what comes out of our mouth, how we conduct ourselves, how we contribute is all up to us. And my parents, my mother was a second generation to this country because her parents, her great-grandparents were immigrants also to this country. And, although we were not well off, we worked very hard to achieve the things that we've had. And sometimes the boots were not there to pull yourself up by. And so that tenacity, that resilience, those seeds of hope were definitely part of my journey and part of my perception and values that I pass on to my kids. When the going gets tough, it's okay. Keep going. It'll get better.
So I want to talk about, going gets tough. There's the story about when your son was born, and that you were 24 and was pregnant with your son. Is it Chedrick? Is that how do you pronounce his name?
Yes, ma'am. Very good.
And that you were single, you're working at a gas station as a cashier in Prince William County, making $5.25 an hour, and that you were having some health issues. And I had early onset diabetes in the pregnancy that almost resulted in a stroke, and that your job did not offer health insurance. and that you learned about Medicaid. You talk about some people are on first base and people are on third base. This is such a great example of, I don't even know if you were on first base yet. And that you learned about Medicaid. And, one, I'm curious about what was that like? I mean, I think that there is a stigma around public benefits. And I'm a believer that benefits are there for a reason. And that's exactly the kind of case where we want people to be able to use public benefits where you are working and doing everything to help your family, but you need that assistance. Can you talk to us about what that experience was like and how that has influenced your feelings about public benefits?
I think that, when my father was murdered when I was 2, we were on public assistance. I am no stranger to standing in food lines, almost being homeless, trying to rob Peter to pay Paul, as the old adage goes, and finding ways to keep food on the table and the lights on and a roof over your head. My mother used to tell the story about our first Christmas tree being a Charlie Brown Christmas tree, a branch from the outside, and how she worked for weeks and weeks and weeks and months just to buy me one present for Christmas, and finding that opportunity. When you hear that, it's not that it's a sad story, but it's a hard story to find that a lot of, Virginians are having the same, experience in 2023. I was born in 1973, the year Roe v. Wade was passed. I was born, when the evolution of disco and music and just the voices of women and the contributions and the hardships were being exposed in media and in the mainstream. And I think that when I was on Medicaid and that stigma that my mother shared with me, I felt some of that. I was afraid to be on Medicaid, but I couldn't go without it because of those medical challenges. I could have died giving birth to my son coded while I was giving birth to him. And it scared the life out of me, but I was so grateful for the opportunity to have insurance and not have, thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars being burdened on the hospital that helped me, but, being able to have a vessel to help me and relieve those impacts. And so after the birth of my son continued to have medical challenges as he grew up, either from disability, from breathing. He almost died several times as he was growing up. Medicaid saved our lives.
Fast forward when you were the whip.
Yes.
Talk to me about what that meant to you when you all were able to expand Medicaid to, I think it was 400,000, 500,000 Virginians. Talk to me about that.
Counting. I think it's now up to 700,000. When I went to Richmond, there was 2 things I wanted to accomplish: passing Medicaid expansion and the Equal Rights Amendment. I had worked on this for decades, prior to getting elected to office. Again, going back to my volunteerism, that day I just cried because I, a recipient, the exception to the rule, had a seat at the table and was able to push that green button. I think we were forward thinking. Imagine what COVID would have done to those folks who didn't have access to healthcare. And it's just, being compassionate for people and embracing that. It doesn't mean that my mother used to say, don't look down at anyone unless you're helping them up. And that is how I felt that day. I was really so excited to know that we are doing something for everyday citizens who have stories like mine and others. And it's progress. It felt like I really did something. If I had left or something would have happened in my next reelect, I could go to sleep at night knowing that was passed and that is law here in the great state of Virginia.
It's an incredible story to see it kind of come full circle. You were talking about how you grew up in a family where your mom was struggling, and you were a waitress when you were, was that your first job? Were you 15 maybe?
Yes, I was 15 years old.
What kind of lessons did you learn as being a waitress that have impacted who you are?
I think there was something in me that says, I hate being poor. This is tough. It's overrated and I hate being poor. And I wanted to work. I wanted to get a job. I wanted to make my own money. I didn't not knowing what the future would bring at 15, years old. I was like, I'm going to do everything I can to save, 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 save. But my own family, my stepfather being in the military, didn't get paid that much. My mother had to stay home because my sisters had challenges as well. My middle sister had disabilities, and there was just things that she could not do and restricted her to the home front. I remember bringing home money and giving it to my dad, giving it to my mother, and being so proud of that work. So hard work as a waitress was interesting. I won't tell you any of those stories, but I just kept working. I would go to middle school. I would go to school. I would go to work, wake up, keep doing it, keep doing it. If somebody would have taught me how to start a business, I think I would have, because I was so driven to get out of poverty and help my family. As we were in this together, and that's all I wanted to do, was to find ways to bring extra resources so we didn't have to worry about the food or the bills, or watching my mother wring her fingers and wondering how she was going to buy somebody a gift. We had made strides in our economic status, no doubt, but there was so much more to be made.
Can you mention that there were some funny stories from when you were a waitress? Are you able to share any stories from, I think a waitress is one of the most interesting jobs somebody could have, especially as a young person, to learn how to interact with people and deal with people from all walks of life. Are there any things that you can remember from that shaped your ability to interact with people from being a waitress at 15?
Yeah, sometimes, depending if you were working on Saturday mornings, it was called the Ranch House. It was on Route 1 in Woodbridge, because that's where we moved from Fairfax County in 81. The funny thing about this is that there was a gentleman that used to come in. He was a frequent flyer. He was numerically mature. We don't use the word senior, numerically mature. And he would always want me to taste his food. He would come in. He was like, here, honey. He was very old school. Words and language that we used then are not appropriate now, but he would say, honey, come here. I want you to taste this good food. He thought he needed to feed me. He would come in sweet, very numerically mature. He had lost his spouse. But he would talk to me about his stories. He served our country. He was, Marine, I believe. And he just talked about why he came to the ranch house and what comfort it brought him. And he would do it every Saturday morning. In the evenings, that was a whole different story. Rebecca, it's probably not appropriate for daytime audiences. It was a different kind of crowd. But they brought some interesting perspectives. They talked about their hardships. If I served them, they just wanted a friend, to very colorful other conversations that, because I was so tall, they didn't know I was 15 years old. They just presumed that I was an adult.
Yeah, being 5'2", I don't often get confused as being an adult. Even now, sometimes people think
I was 5'8", 5'7", 5'8".
Yeah.
I was getting up. I was pretty tall.
My son is 14 and he's an umpire, and boy is he learning some big lessons about dealing with people as a little league umpire with some crazy little league parents.
Yes, I played little league, actually, not baseball, but fast pitch. I love team sports. I love being part of a family and the community. So that was also a value during my recreational time that I would do. I thought it was going to be, something, I don't know, I just liked the game. It was competitive, and, but it also told you and teaches you how to work together, even under your son's experiences. We had some of those too.
What position did you play in softball?
So I first started as shortstop, and then I ended up as first baseman.
Because you were tall.
I was tall, and
Yeah.
I must have did something right, because that's really a hard position to play.
It is. I played fast pitch softball too growing up, so I
Yeah.
can relate. So on a more serious note, you talked about your father,
Mhm.
and I've heard you talk about this in speeches, and it's really a powerful story that when you were 2, your father was murdered from gun violence. and the impact that's had on you as a person, as well as your positions about gun control. Can you talk about how that shaped your positions about guns and who you are?
You know, my mother didn't tell me until I was 5. Somehow, some way I knew, I don't know how to articulate that. We would talk about gun violence in our house, and my mother was deathly afraid of guns. She suffered after that loss. My father, just to put in perspective, and my mother, my biological father, mother got married at 21 years old. And they had all these plans mapped out, how they were going to have kids, how they were going to have, a life together. He was a bricklayer, Afro-Latina man from El Salvador. My mother, like an Irish Lebanese, they sort of got along, found a way to, cultivate and bring together and make these cultural differences be this beautiful and wonderful thing. When he was murdered about 1.5 to 2 years later after they were married, I was born, in that time. It was very tragic. I remember my aunts talking about how my mother suffered a lot mentally from that trauma. She found out that he was dead in the newspaper. A morning obituary came through that this man had been shot, said his name. My aunt came down. We lived in an apartment building off of Route 1, Richmond Highway in Fairfax County. And the scream, I just remember that as young as I was, that's the only thing I remembered. Some years later, 5, 6, 7, my mother told me the story about what happened, everything. When I was 9, my mother remarried to a gentleman, of course, like I said, in the military. He was a gun owner. And I was still deathly afraid of it because of what I had experienced prior to. He told me what responsible gun ownership looks like. My mother and father were married 20 some years before she passed. But my family, my step family, to put that in perspective, all were gun owners. They served in the military and they were responsible. They talked about locking this up, why it's important. I never did it, but I was around it. When I went to Richmond, I had that balance of contrast of what responsible gun ownership looks like and what tragedy looks like. And I just this could not go unanswered. In my work in the security field, in cyber and national security, I also was definitely exposed to responsible gun ownership and the practices and the tragedies that happen in our community now that guns are the #1 killer of our children. That breaks my heart. I don't want another kid to die. I don't want another kid to hear the screams of, a wife or a sister or a family or a loved one witnessing. I'm sorry.
Okay.
A tragedy. And I just think we can do this sensibly. I think we can do this collaboratively and help our families. We have to find some compassion in our heart and not let our people die.
I'll give you a minute if you need a second. I agree with everything you're saying. I mentioned that I was in Israel over spring break, and my family unfortunately saw missiles flying in from terrorist organizations, and it was really scary. And it was terrifying. And the Israelis kind of were like, well, this is life as normal. And the question they said to us, they said, we don't understand how you send your children to school. That in the United States, kids are killed regularly at, a shopping mall or at church or at a concert and, at a hospital, at schools. And it was flabbergasting to them how we live the way we do, because it's so scary that just doesn't happen in other parts of the world. And it's such a problem in the United States. Are there ideas or thoughts that you have about legislation that you would try to introduce that would tackle the gun violence issue if you were elected to Senate?
Absolutely. So, we did in the Democratic majority pass a suite of gun violence measures. Mine that I particularly, ushered in with Delegate Jeff Bourne was about reporting a lost or stolen firearm. I thought that was very pragmatic. this was even touching on my own personal story. It wasn't that it was stolen, is that somebody took it from my father's car, and he was trying to protect our family because of where we lived. He was killed with his own gun. You know, he had bought it that day. He had put it in his car. He didn't take precautionary steps and not showing people what he bought, but he was proud. He thought he was doing the right thing by saying, this is how I'm going to protect my family, because we lived in an area that was, you know, very scary, you know, in plain terms. It was just very scary, the things that were happening. He wanted to protect, he thought this was the right thing to do to protect his family. And it was the very thing that killed him. You know, so passing that 30-day reporting time period was something that wasn't exactly like my story, but very connected to, you know, the firearm being taken or stolen and reporting it. I think we can strengthen background checks. There's so much going on in the world that we can talk about ways. I work in national security. You would think that there's strict scrutiny and measures that are put in place for the types of documents that you handle that could cause grave harm to our national security. We should do that. We should think about this collaboratively together, pragmatically, and how to balance, you know, the rights to ownership, but the rights to protect our children, to protect our families. And we can do that. We're very smart. We are evolved enough to come to the table and have a conversation about pragmatism, you know, ghost guns, things that we are doing that are, you know, contributing to this violence. We can do better. And so with that, I would love to work with the stakeholders, you know, the naysayers. I want to hear it all, so that we are putting in measures that are not harmful, but that are helpful to the very thing we're speaking about. This epidemic, this crisis, that is the #1 killer of our children. That just bothers me. I don't know how we cannot care about our families, our babies going to school and worrying about the safest place, which should be learning, being killed. That's just so bizarre to me. I don't know how else to put it. And I'm happy to have that conversation. I know people are passionate on both sides of this topic, and that's okay. But we can do something together. We can make change together.
I was volunteering at my kid's school, and I happened to be there on a day where there was a lockdown drill. And it was, I know they do them, and I'm glad they do them, but I had never seen it. And I was there and watched what they did. And the kids were, you know, oh, this is just a normal everyday, you know, same thing as a fire drill. And I came home and cried, because to watch this is so normal for my children to have to hide in a corner in their classroom in case there's a shooter in the school. And they're used to this. They've grown up with this. This is not unusual for them. Is just heartbreaking. You know, you talk about how there's people on both sides. In Richmond, we certainly see that right now more than ever, about, you know, it is such a split legislature. Can you talk about some of the ways that you approach being bipartisan and building coalitions, and maybe some things from your experience that would help shape your ability to be bipartisan?
You know, as I said, you know, I grew up in a military family. You know, after my mother remarried, I've been around the military in my job. And when you are defending your country, whether it be on land, water, and cyberspace, we're a family. We can disagree. We can have, you know, very passionate arguments. But at the end of the day, if you're there to do something to help someone, that is the goal. That is the mission. That is always what is at the forefront of my mind. I'd rather have an argument with someone that I disagree with and come back and have another conversation and see how we can work pragmatically together. You know, as I'm knocking doors in the 33rd district and talking to voters, they are tired of the divisiveness. I like to think of myself as a pragmatist, as someone who will let you, you know, invent the challenges that you have, even if we disagree, and listen, and then come back and let's have another conversation. We're here right now. We're very passionate here, but let's get here and let's talk about this sensibly. Do we agree and find ways we can meet where the rubber meets the road, where we can find agreement, where we can find consensus, where we can find coalition building? And sometimes you'd have to take people where they are. We're not going to all come from the same beliefs systems or experiences. And we always have the, yeah, but this. These are good conversations, but this doesn't mean that these conversations should not be held accountable for action. And that is the thing we need to do. We can have all of the what ifs in the world, but the fact is, this is the number one killer of our children. That is what we know. More mass shootings than there have been days in this year thus far. That is a tragedy. And we have the power to do something. Can we agree on that and start there? And so being bipartisan means that you have the ability to build those relationships and trust, that even though we can agree to disagree, we can still have a conversation. And that's what I did as a whip. That is what I did with senators. My job is not to make enemies in this space. My job is to do my job. And that's the focus.
You know, while you talk about doing your job, there's a story I read in the Washington Post about you, and this is when you were running for lieutenant governor. And I had not heard this story before, but that on your first day as a delegate in the Capitol, that a veteran delegate hit on you, and that you rebuffed the advance and have not named this person and have continued to have a working relationship with him in the Capitol, which kind of blew my mind because I don't know if I'm quite as magnanimous as you would be to be able to be respectful towards somebody who treated somebody like that. You know, how were you able to continue working with somebody like that?
Not every situation can call for that, just to be clear. But in that moment, something hit me. I have a choice. This can be a learning opportunity, or this could be a very divisive opportunity. It was hard. It wasn't easy to pick a choice in that, because I was shocked. I was angered by it. And I said, how would my children want me to act in this moment? And so I chose, right or wrong, a compassionate way to address it. Although I appreciate X, don't do that again, please. And I just chose to address it there. Added a sprinkle of humor, because that's how I deal with things. And sometimes, you add some humor. That was my defense at the time. And in ways to not create this space as a new delegate, it was hard. I didn't know what to do. Although I faced it before, it was just a different space, because I hold so high regard for these halls of Madison, Jefferson, people that have created the Constitution. And I guess I just held it to such a higher standard that I didn't expect it to happen. Later on, that delegate apologized. We said it was inappropriate, acknowledged it, appreciated the way I handled it. And we just kept it moving. Like, we're there to do a job. And I chose that route. And again, not everybody will. And I don't do it that for every situation, but something struck me in that moment. And I just went with my gut on the way to handle it. And so it was hard, because people have said I should have done X, and I should have had expectations. And I talked with people about it, not the individual. I never named them. But I just said, this was my experience. And they said, you should do this and you should do this. And I said, I can do that, but I chose to do this. And that's my choice.
And it was your very first day.
Well, I was overwhelmed. At first I thought I had read it wrong. I was like, no, then he reiterated and made it a little bit more clearer. And I was like, okay, well, this is what's not going to happen on day one, and I don't have time for that. I don't have time for this. I'm getting sworn in. I appreciate it. No, thank you. Let's keep it moving. Very inappropriate. Keep it moving. And I kept it moving. I don't know if it's my resiliency. I work in a very male dominated field of cyber and tech and national security. I've worked around admirals, commandants, captains, commanders. And, they have a zero tolerance policy, right? And so I was trying to find my footing day one, and I sort of used that sort of cultural value to bring forth a solution and kept it moving.
I have a lot of respect for how you handled the situation. And,
Um,
you talked about how you've
what do
worked
you-
in cybersecurity. I know you worked in the Coast Guard and Department of Homeland Security. How did you
Mhm.
get interested in cybersecurity? And how is this something that has influenced who you are as a politician?
My stepfather worked in, I call him my dad. I'm just not trying to confuse your participants, but my dad is an intelligence satcoms. He could never talk about his job. He could never talk about what he does. He could never say how his day was. And I was so intrigued. The irony of this is I started to get into security very early on, pre 9/11. Um, I was writing classification guidance with no official training for the way we handle classified documents, doing research. I just absorbed it very quickly. It was just something that organically, I had no formal degree. I was out of high school. I just had some government training. And the next thing you know, I wrote classification for Deepwater, which it was very prominent in the news for the United States Coast Guard. Won a contract, won employment, you know, got a clearance and worked. And then, then we had other things that happened like 9/11. It changed the way I stood up the largest component of DHS, again, with military members who brought me along. They taught me on the job. I had on the job training. So I'm a firm believer in workforce development and, training. It saved my life, economic life, I should say. I was able to buy a house, have opportunities. And I want to do that in the General Assembly. I want to talk about individuals with disabilities and the things that I've seen in my own experience and how the world of tech, with individuals that are neurotypical, like my son, who could thrive in these spaces because of some of those nuances that those challenges bring, but can be applied in other areas. I want us to be creative. I want us to think out the box. I want to make sure everyone has an opportunity to be a participant, a participating citizen in the Commonwealth.
Now, I don't know exactly when in your career this kind of came about, but I've read that. So I know that you adopted your daughter Amber when she was 16, and that there's the cost of raising two children obviously is very expensive, particularly when there's a child who needs medications and healthcare issues. But that you were frustrated that you were not earning as much as male counterparts at work. Can you talk to us about how you realize that and how that has impacted you as well?
Well, we have pay schedules in the government, right? But the individual was a contractor in my government space. And he said he was very young, 28 years old, and I was much more numerically mature than him. And he said, will you help me with my resume? And on his resume, with just 3 years experience, he was making $40,000 more than me.
Wow.
And I said to this individual, I'm going to help you with your resume, but is that the right salary? Did you put too many zeros there? I was flabbergasted. I'm a GS 12 in the upper ranks. My equivalency is that of a lieutenant in the United States Coast Guard. And I was, Lord, he was like, yes, isn't that how much you make? And I said, I didn't know what to do at that moment. Again, it was I was like, well, that's not important. Let's talk about your resume. And, I was floored. And I think that day was a learning lesson for me. I think that I have found ways to advocate for myself. And sometimes, in the contractor spaces, you have to work extra hard, depending on who you are and what you look like. And I was okay with that, but I wasn't going to take it sitting down, so I would write a white paper, why I deserve a raise, what values I brought to the table. And so as we have evolved in this conversation in the United States, more and more employers are having open discussions about this. The individual that I work with now is very equitable, very very fair. And I appreciate it. I do cyber work. I just now, even as I speak, I do program management for several entities, including my former employer, Coast Guard, and the Navy, cyberspace, CISO, all of these things, these projects that we have access to and work on, and business development. He's opening up opportunities for me to hopefully one day become a part of the C-suite, that executive environment. And I can appreciate that. You just show me the door, you open it this much, and I'm going to go through it. That's all I want, is an opportunity.
Are there things that you think you may be able to do in Richmond to help address issues of equity and pay? It particularly impacts women of color, and that, there's been a lot of stories, particularly since COVID, that this has impacted women of color more than anyone. Are there thoughts that you have about how we can improve this?
Absolutely. There's a lot of legislation that you've seen at the federal level that, that have created significant conversations and milestones, like the Lilly Ledbetter Act, which was not federal legislation or law per se, but the act highlighted this very issue of pay inequity. There's legislation for pay and equity that we are talking about, which relates to equal pay. So, like compensations, talking about ways we can compensate, under the current federal laws and discriminatory practices, ways that we can create and work with our Department of Labor, our stakeholders, to talk about equal pay laws, those biases that exist in that legislation. There's also, the act that I spoke of, the Lilly Ledbetter Act, but building upon the Equal Pay Act of 1963, which does state illicitly employers cannot pay unequal wages to women. So we can talk about that and how we can build legislation around that. I know that we can adopt our own equal pay acts here in the state. I know New York has a pay equity bill that was passed in 2015. We can talk about those here. Maryland has one. And we need to continue to talk about those balances, and again, setting that platform equitably. And the state of Virginia, states like Alaska, Arizona, have this, but we in Virginia need to just sort of level the playing field and talk about pay equity and how we can remove that discriminatory practice, based on sex, how we can, balance the wages and opportunities for everyone, not just some, because if it helps me, it helps you. I know Virginia has done not an act, but has said that employers can't discriminate based on sex by paying different wages. And we can continue to build upon that, and just, again, work with our stakeholders to make sure that it is equitable, that the legislation does what it's intended to do. But I think we can add the word male or female, in this conversation. We should balance this out and make sure that all participants, or all individuals are covered under these laws.
So thinking legislative priorities, if you were elected, what would be some of the top issues you'd want to advance in the next 4 years?
I would like to talk about curriculum and tech in the schools and what that would look like. So we work with our stakeholders. I did work in the General Assembly and co-patron the bill to make coding a second language. If there's ways that we can improve opportunities, again, tech is at the core of my heart. It's not the only business that exists, but it is a sector that is dominating, like cybersecurity, national security, and other IT sectors. Would love to, make it a trade. If you want to learn how to do networking, if you want to learn components of engineering, we can hands-on experience. Let's talk about curriculums there. Disabilities, working more for disabilities, making sure we have enough mental health space, healthcare, and opportunities for services that our communities that are in the disability space have access to. Those are some of my priorities. Reproductive health, making sure that we pass the constitutional amendment to codify Roe. We have taken steps, as you saw Senator McClellan's bill that we've supported and passed while in the majority. There's more to do. If we want to make our Commonwealth equitable, this means on the business front, the economic front, all individuals that reside in this state, we have to think about it globally, equitably, and not just, these spaces. And this takes a long time to do, but I'm willing to have the conversations to get it done and get it done if we're able to. I know that, you know, we've had conversation, the political, I'm searching for words to describe it because there's an intersectionality to that conversation when you don't have the majority. Sometimes things that we'd like to have passed aren't passed. And then sometimes they are, like Medicaid expansion that was a bipartisan effort. And that was a beautiful thing that we did together, both Republicans and Democrats, to usher in such a transformative opportunity for Virginians. If we can do that, we can do more together.
Well, and I put in a plug of one of my own personal agenda items that I've been working on is to try to get Virginia to pass paid family leave. As a business owner, it's a huge one that impacts employees and business owners. That I know I've worked with Senator Boysko to try to get that passed, and hopefully maybe one day we'll get it through. But
we've had some studies on it. Like mine was infant fetal mortality. I was able to work with our stakeholders and organizations and to talk about infant fetal mortality rates that are higher amongst Black and brown women versus non-diverse women. But these are important steps. Like, we have a lot to build on, a lot of conversation to be had, and a lot of progress to be made. And I think the consensus among Virginians, they just want us to do our job and do just that. Stop with the bolstering and the positioning and the theatrics. Just do your job. We have exhausted, as you've seen across the United States. It's just, my mother would say to me, "You're just doing too much. Just do what I've asked you to do, just stop." And so that's where my pragmatism is. I understand we're passionate about our positions, and that's okay. I respect that. But when it gets in the way of progress, I don't have much to say.
What committees would you seek to serve on if you were elected?
Well, I would love to work, believe it or not. My stepfather is from the great state of Pennsylvania. I've been exposed to some agriculture. I would love to get more involved in that aspect and be more educated and work to help our farmers. While running for lieutenant governor, I was aware that, I was aware, but you become even more aware when you're standing in front of a farmer, you're having those real conversations about the impact to our economics. Agriculture is 30% of our economic portfolio. And when COVID hit, those impacts and things that we can do. So I would love to work there. I would love to be back on the finance committee. I was on the finance committee working on ways we can make Virginians and taxes balanced and have that pragmatic conversation. I would love to be on, work, maybe have another committee where we work on more cyber, more technology, AI. I know this goes through the labor and commerce committees, but I think there's an opportunity to build another platform when we're talking about the digital space. And they do, maybe it's a combination of both, but I would love to see something like that. This sector is represented in our economy. It is a large portion. As you've heard through COVID, we were able to telework because of our tech sector. Not every job could, but it offered opportunities to make transitions, to find additional jobs. We still have over 700,000 plus tech jobs available in the United States, at entry level. Believe me, it changed my life. So if you are listening and you have someone that's interested in tech, please go fill out an application and start that process. My story is unique and not everybody is going to have that same door opened for them. Mine started back in the 1990s. And, there's just so much we can do to start on the job training, getting people clearances, getting them healthcare. And it reduces their dependency on, other services. So let's, I don't know. When I got a job at 15 years old, I was just so proud. Yeah. And for those who can't, we need to be compassionate. We need to look at every situation pragmatically and see how we can help every Virginian.
My son will always have the special story that his first ever job was being a page in the state Senate, which he did, this past session. When you were first elected, you and Delegate Guzman were the first Latina women delegates in Virginia. What did that mean to you?
It's like I said, where spaces in history would not create a space for women that look like us. I use the adage, if you don't have a seat at the table, then you're on the menu. And I think our voices are contributing to the ever-changing demographics in this country. I think, me as an Afro-Latina, having these lived experiences can talk to the policies and the real life impacts that it would have, the changes we can make. And maybe I'm just an optimist at heart, but I believe in hope and change. And electing 2 Latinas to this body was change, was progress. We all have our global perspectives and views on life and those contributions. But as I said, the plethora of our diversity and the work that we have contributed to the country can be expressed in good legislation and policy, and if given the opportunity. So that would mean a lot to be in a space. Maybe it's going to be a repeat, or I don't know, but to be in that space and continue to do good work and work with good people, as I've done in my other legislative capacity, is the goal and at the core of why I want to return to service.
Would you be the first female Latina elected to the state Senate?
I would.
All right, well, we're starting to wrap up, and I have one last question for you that is always my favorite question to ask people. I've posted this a number of times. What do you like to do for fun?
Oh, Rebecca, fun.
Real fun, not like knocking on doors fun.
That's fun to me. I don't know.
Oh, no, that's not fun. That's what we do because we know it makes a difference. That's not fun.
I like to spend time with my family. I like to go to movies. We like to do karaoke. I'm horrible at it, but it's still fun. I like to just, talk to my neighbors, walk my dog. I like to exercise. It helps reduce stress. I like to do a lot of things. Nothing, go get my nails done, anything therapeutic, I would say I like to do. I just think we have one opportunity to live this life, you should find some ways to enjoy it. I now have adopted traveling. It is something that I would like to continue to do. I want to go see Italy, Africa, Egypt. I want to go to different places and see. When you get exposed to the way other people live, it brings another perspective and sort of humbles you a lot.
Absolutely. Well, Hala, Ayala, thank you so much for your time this morning. It was a pleasure getting to know more about your story. I've known you for a long time, but I always feel like I learn something new about you each time. And we are excited to hear more about what the future holds for you. And thank you for sharing your time with us today.
Thank you for having me, Rebecca. Thank you, DemBiz. Be well, be blessed. Don't do anything I wouldn't do. If you do, do it better.
I love that. That's great. DemBiz, everyone, thank you all for being with us today, and keep your eyes out for our future events. We have another one next Friday to meet Jennifer Carroll Foy. Thank you all so much. Have a good day.